Missouri is North America's longest river. Its headwaters are in the Rocky Mountains of present-day Montana, and from there it flows for more than 2,300 miles through the mountains, across the northern plains, and south to the Gulf of Mexico. Hi, I'm Emily Sackerson with the Northern Plains National Heritage Area. For centuries, this section of the Missouri River has shaped history and culture. The interconnected stories of Native Americans, explorers and settlers, and farmers and ranchers on the Northern Plains contribute to our nation's diverse heritage. When I think about the Missouri River here in central North Dakota, I think about the scenic trails and the interconnected historic sites up and down its banks. From Double Ditch to Cross Ranch State Park, from Fort Mandan and the Lewis Clark Interpretive Center to the blockhouses at Fort Lincoln. This place is as fascinating as it is beautiful. The river is central to so many incredible stories, connecting people and place for generations. And for that reason, the Missouri River has always seemed timeless to me. Public historian and historic sites manager for the State Historical Society, Rob Hanna, can help us visualize a time 25,000 years ago when there was no Missouri River at all.
When the glaciers began to form, you had the Knife River flowing at that time east towards Hudson's Bay. When the glaciers blocked it, it formed up into a lake there until it filled, and then dramatically, this must have happened in one incredibly wild day, the water overflowed that and shot on down parallel to the glacier southwards towards Bismarck and beyond. And so the Missouri River in the Northern Plains Heritage Area formed only about 25,000 years ago through that glacial event.
And since that time, for the most part, the 80-mile stretch of the Missouri River that winds through the Northern Plains National Heritage Area has been a hub of human activity, an ever-evolving avenue of culture and commerce.
It's interesting to me how the Missouri River has changing landscapes and has dramatically changing meanings throughout its history.
We asked historian Dakota Goodhouse about the Missouri River's place in history and heritage. For him, the Missouri River has meaning today because it connects us to our ancestors. Ancestral ties to place give us a sense of belonging and identity.
So a long time ago, the Missouri River was brown. The Lakota people called it Minishoshe, which means the water astir. And it was our observation that any point where another water converged with the Missouri River, where a river would converge with the Missouri, there'd be a swirl in the river. So it would pick up all the sediment and the river ran brown. So they called it that, Minishoshe, the water astir. During that time, this became the center of North America. This is where trade came. The Mandan could be depended on to be found in the same place year after year.
This area is the ancestral homeland of the Mandan and Hidatsa, the original farmers of the plains. By the time the first Europeans arrived in this area in 1738, the Mandan and Hidatsa have been living in earth lodge villages along the river for over 500 years. Today, remnants of some of those once bustling towns form the Knife River Indian Villages National Historic Site near Stanton. The National Park Unit offers a glimpse into life on the Northern Plains generations ago, bringing archaeology to life and interpreting the significance of this place to people today.
We go back on both sides of my family. My mom's German, Norwegian, American, and has grandparents that homesteaded along the Missouri River. And then on my dad's side is Arikara Hidatsa, and on that side we've been here for a long time along the Missouri River. So that connection to the Missouri is pretty strong. I like to joke and say I represent a lot of voices in North Dakota, just in myself, just from being Native, and then also have Scandinavian background. But it is really important to recognize all aspects of where we come from. So being able to work at Knife River, live and work in my ancestral homelands is really important to me.
Alisha has been overseeing the National Historic Site at the confluence of the Knife and Missouri Rivers for 2 years. When asked about the significance of the Missouri River, Alisha makes it pretty clear.
One of the simplest things is, without that river, life as we know it right now wouldn't exist. Bismarck probably would not be here. the community that they grew up in wouldn't be here without the Missouri River.
There would have been 9 to maybe 13 Mandan towns just within a few miles of each other around what's now Bismarck and Mandan, connected by footpaths in the river valleys, probably thousands of acres of fields, I suspect almost contiguous for all those miles on both sides.
When an archaeologist or even the casual observer walks through a Mandan village, you might see the remains of that trade, the impact of intertribal, intercontinental trade. Some of the things that amaze me to see at these Mandan village sites is dentalium shells from the west coast, cowrie shells from the Gulf Coast, wampum shells from the east coast. That's significant. It's huge how far trade came to these peoples along the Missouri River.
Archaeologist Damita Engel has spent more than 20 years studying Plains villages, trying to better understand how life along the Missouri River has changed over time.
So there are a lot of village sites that are well known that are on the heritage area up and down the Missouri. Chief Looking's Village is a great example. It's in town, so you can easily get to it and visit it to get a glimpse of this, because the Missouri River, as it stands right here and up through to Cross Ranch, is virtually unchanged. If you close your eyes and can block out some of the sights and sounds of our modern world, this is what the river looked like to pre-contact people.
What you have at the Missouri River is a superhighway leading to a commercial hub, a place where European trappers, traders, and explorers found economic opportunity and, of course, capitalized on it. While increased contact between Europeans, Americans, and indigenous communities brought certain benefits, it also came with deadly consequences, like disease.
Lewis and Clark describe seeing ruined Mandan towns, and it must have been a very eerie and tragic thing to see. Just a few decades ago, this would have been teeming with thousands and probably tens of thousands of people. And now they describe seeing collapsed earth lodges, abandoned homes, and they may not have known it, but of course there would have been the burials of many, many thousands of people in and around those towns who had died in those epidemics.
The smallpox epidemic in the mid-1770s through the 1780s was wreaking havoc across the continent, as you can read in Elizabeth Fenn's Pax Americana. It was a turbulent time, and we may not always realize the significant tension between different groups occupying lands along the Missouri River were the result of events unfolding elsewhere. North Dakota may feel remote, but our history is inextricably linked to broader events that form our national heritage.
I like to think that conflict is probably a holdover from the American Revolution. Honestly, there were still British and French trappers and traders out here on the upper Missouri, and Americans were making their way up, and they carried the baggage of the flags that were out here. And who's still out here? Well, John Evans, who was under the Spanish flag, some of the French trappers and traders, Charbonneau, Dave Thompson, Englishman, So we have all these old world politics, and suddenly this flag of a new country that shows up with its own politics and its own history with all these other countries. And it adds a layer of tension that already exists amongst our Indian peoples.
We talked about steamboat traffic starting to arrive in this area, and the landscape kind of transforms yet again.
The first steamboat to ply the upper Missouri River was the American Fur Company's steamboat Yellowstone in 1831. Within a decade, steamboats were commonplace here.
So the Northern Pacific Railroad, it was supposed to be the second transcontinental railroad in the United States, was built from St. Paul and Duluth to Bismarck by 1873. And that was the point when the railroad went bankrupt and the J. Cook Bank with it. This was a massively leveraged project, funded really by land that had been forcibly taken from Dakota, Lakota, and other tribal peoples on the Northern Plains. And Yeah, it went bankrupt when the rails got essentially to the river on the Bismarck side. And when it brought down the bank, the J. Cook Bank with it, it actually brought down the economy of the United States and Europe with it as well. One of the last pieces of the railroad to be built is that rail bridge in Bismarck and Mandan. And it changes everything. And that bridge was finished in October of 1882. And by 1883, you've got Teddy Roosevelt moving here, you've got the Marquis de Mores moving here, trying to start this massive cattle raising and slaughtering operation. UND gets founded, the University of North Dakota. Jamestown College is founded, the state penitentiary in Bismarck on the railroad line. The Asa Fisher House, which became the governor's mansion, is built. Obviously, the Chateau de Moras was built that year. My gosh, I mean, I could go on and on. It's the Dakota boom. And it was emblematic of the dramatic change that was coming to the Northern Plains at the time.
Immigration swelled, agricultural prices rose, and we became the #1 wheat-producing state. Looking ahead a generation to when the Garrison Dam was completed north of Bismarck-Mandan to control seasonal flooding along the Missouri River and improve irrigation for all the farm and ranch lands that were homesteaded in the boom years, we see yet another huge change in the Missouri River landscape, this time physically as well as culturally.
So we have all these dams along the Missouri River, and had a deep impact, a profound impact on my people, a lot of tribes, Mandan, Hidatsa, Rikara especially, the people up at Fort Peck, the people at Lower Brule in South Dakota, the Yankton down in South Dakota. Every place where a dam was put, the water backed up and flooded places where people were born and raised, and that's a deep emotional wound to carry. When the Missouri River was dammed, there was in essence a personification of the river that was chained up. And when you talk to maybe a traditionalist, they might even say, well, that's when the river began to die.
The Garrison and Owyhee dams of the 1950s profoundly impacted the Missouri River Valley and its communities. Approved under the Flood Control Act of 1944 and built by the Army Corps of Engineers, the Owyhee Dam created Lake Owyhee, and the Garrison Dam created Lake Sakakawea. They flooded nearly all of the Missouri River bottomlands in the process. It's estimated that despite their objection, approximately 200,000 tribal citizens were forced to relocate, abandoning whole towns and communities that they'd been living in for generations. It was traumatic, and that's very much alive in family memory.
Our whole culture shifted for the MHA. It's still there, but it's not as connected as it used to be. But we'd go out on the lake, and this place that we always camped, it's Old Highway 8, or it's called it, in our family we call it the Old Place. It's the road that would go down to Elbow Woods on the north side of the lake. And my grandpa took us out on the boat, and I just thought this was a really great trip. Nice day, it was beautiful, and we stopped, and then he was pointing out things where a hill where he would go and pick choke cherries and June berries when he was a kid. And his mom, my great-grandma Ina, would pack a lunch, and they would just have fun. And then we moved to a spot, and he's like, 20 feet down is where I grew up. And then it just hits you like, oh my gosh, we don't have that connection anymore to the river.
This change in the Missouri River affected residents' ability to maintain cultural traditions, along with sense of self. Justin Deegan comes from a long line of storytellers in his family. He works as a filmmaker, actor, and preservationist. He strives to capture and celebrate his family's history through oral history, and, naturally, interacting with the Missouri River is central to many of their stories.
I guess a big part of my interaction with the Missouri really comes from my relationship with my father and my mother, and a lot of those Arikara stories that I heard growing up. Knowing and understanding the detriment that the Garrison Diversion Project had created not only within the landscape of our homelands, but within the societies of our MHA nation. And being in the Missouri region that's underwater, that's underneath Lake Sacagawea, my dad would talk about the river a lot. And then being a person who records oral history myself, among a lot of our elders, they really talk reverently about the Missouri and the bottomlands and the good old days, as they would say. Elbow Woods days, Nishu days, what have you. There's a lot of different stories that are related to that. My generation, we don't have that same relationship with the Missouri the way they did, because they grew up with it. They hunted, they planted, and all those things are gone. And that Missouri was changed forever once they built that dam. And everybody had to go up into higher lands, and they lost their homes, their livelihoods. There was hospital, there was a school, and so a lot of those things went away. And so there's been multi-generations of trauma as a result of that dam, and how it has affected the framework of who we are as human beings, even within our immediate families.
And the lake is just a constant reminder of everything that we've lost to that point. I don't think people realize it. Our youth don't sometimes even realize it or know that Knife River even exists. So that education, what we're doing now, talking about this, having people talk about these things is really important. So these conversations are needed to be had, and they're difficult, but they're also really important. We're very adaptable people. I think human beings just in general are, and I'm really proud of all my people and everything that we have gone through up to this point. It's just really important that we continue the work and we continue talking about it.
So, we go, we camp, we swim, we go fishing, but the ceremonies aren't there yet, but it's coming back. All of it's coming back. The language is returning, and people are really making a concerted effort to reestablish that relationship with the water, with those ceremonies, and with that language within our families. And so it's a huge movement that's happening right now. And it's a really beautiful thing to see, because those ceremonial people set the path, because they've been praying for generation among generation to reestablish those relationships among us and the younger generations. And so that's where a lot of that change is happening today. So we're learning our history. We're taking the history into our own hands.
Well, I think that as a citizen of North Dakota, that it is vitally important to know as much about the landscape as possible. So even if there's a place like Chief Looking's village, well, that's a Mandan village. It doesn't hurt me to find out more about the Mandan who lived there. It doesn't hurt me to find out why it's called Chief Looking's village. There is a shared history of intermarriage and trade and war with the Mandan people. And I think if I can hear that, if I can listen to it, if I can read it, it gives me a broader perspective. It feels like a brighter sense of illumination or inspiration or understanding to know how and why they valued the landscape.
We often hear the stretch of the Missouri River, bookended by the two dams, characterized as a nearly pristine reflection of how things once looked at a point in time long ago, before European contact, before the steamboat era and the railroads, before today's cities and towns sprouted up on either bank. However, such a simplistic view does a disservice to what the landscape really conveys.
It's a big deal to a lot of people to come to this place and see where so many famous stories happened. Lewis and Clark, or a lot of folks from Europe and especially Germany are familiar with Prince Maximilian and Karl Bodmer, and it's a dream come true to see these places where they went. So the Missouri River is an amazing natural phenomenon, but it's also an amazing cultural phenomenon.